Hello, everybody. It's Randy Spivey again. I'm the academic director of the Fred D. Gray Institute for Law, Justice, and Society, and this is another one of our Law, Justice, and Society graduate interviews. We have Claire Coker with us today. Hello, Claire.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be doing this. Love talking about LJS.
Good. So let's start with just asking you when you were at Lipscomb.
Yeah, I was at Lipscomb the fall of 2012 through the spring of 2016.
Okay. And you graduated as an LJS major. You didn't start as an LJS major.
Right.
Talk to us about how you chose Law, Justice, and Society.
So the first part is the less pretty honest part, where I, in the middle of my junior year, realized that I did not want to finish the major that I had at that point was almost done with. Just had a revelation that it wasn't the right thing for me. And a friend of mine had raved about the few LJS classes she took. And so in a panic, I was like, well, I might as well check that out. And so I went into your office, Professor Spivey, and very anxiously was like, tell me about this program because I need to find something because this other one isn't going to work. So that is how I found LJS, and I'm glad that I did. I think just to add more to that, I think the reason that I stayed was, and why I chose it beyond the panic of finding something new, is I knew that I could ask hard questions and that would be honored rather than kind of seen as a threat or a challenge, but something that would be welcome. And I knew that that thoughtfulness and service was a core part of it. And I did not know if I wanted to go to law school, but I figured regardless of where I ended up, that what I learned would be valuable. That's how I found it.
Well, where are you right now and what are you doing?
So now I am in the DC area. I am just about to finish up a Master's of Divinity at Wesley Theological Seminary. And there I specialized in public theology. So continued a lot of the same questions that I was asking in college about what is the church's role in seeking justice, and how do people who claim the same faith end up on such different spectrums politically, and why has the church played so many different roles in the context of social change? So those are a lot of the questions that I have gotten to ask in my MDiv program, and I'm about to wrap that up as of in like 2 days. I'll be graduating without a ceremony. And then, from there, it's looking for jobs. I'm kind of in this transition point with a lot of other people, and still interested in the intersection of theology and justice, and specifically mental health and racial justice and emotional wellness. And so hoping to find something at that intersection.
Well, talk to me a little bit about the kind of jobs and the kind of places you're drawn to with that degree in public theology.
So the interesting thing with this degree is that most people doing it are getting wanting to go into church ministry. And so it's been an adventure figuring out I've never really wanted to go into church ministry, even though I've done it a lot. Like in college, every summer I was a youth ministry intern and absolutely loved it, but that's never been my main goal. So I started the degree wanting to do a PhD down the line and teach and write and do all of that. And then it's also been really interesting learning about faith-based advocacy, especially in DC. Most denominations have some kind of advocacy office in DC where they are a strong moral voice, on the Hill. So I've learned a lot about that, which I've loved learning about, but hasn't really been my niche. And now I'm more interested in kind of how theology and these big ideas connect to everyday human life. So, for example, one organization that I've been working with is Rock Recovery, and they work with people recovering from eating disorders. And some of my capstone project work was thinking about how theology affects shame, specifically in women, and how we think about ourselves and the relationships to our bodies, and spiritual care kind of being really tied to emotional wellness and mental health and all of those things. So that's one avenue that I could go down.
How is this the same or different than what you expected to be doing when you started college or when you graduated college?
This is not what I expected I would be doing at all. When I was in college, so I did LJS, and then I also was a vocational ministry second major. It wasn't like a full major at that time. I don't know if they have that now, but so I loved theology and learning about it, but it kind of always felt like a side thing for my personal enjoyment rather than what I would have done a master's degree in. So that was definitely not expected. And I think that was some of the same tension that I have felt now of like, oh, well, I don't want to be a pastor. These people seem to really know that they want to be a pastor. And so that's not the route for me. And I kind of like took that off the table. But then right after I graduated, I moved to DC into the Year of Service program. And that's where I continued to have these questions about the church and justice and theology and how do they intersect. And so it eventually became a really natural fit to explore those questions. But when I was in college, I definitely did not expect that. I think it's the same in a lot of ways as when I was in college, in that I'm still navigating that almost interdisciplinary approach and wanting to have expertise from a lot of different fields on the table. And I think that's hard in college because I felt like everyone was kind of committed to this department and got to know everyone in this department and went all 4 years through that. And that wasn't my experience because I jumped around and didn't find LJS until my junior year, and Bible, I wasn't a full major. And so I think that kind of tension is still the same, where I'm getting an MDiv, but I don't necessarily want to be a pastor, and I'm doing public theology, so I'm interested in these issues, but I'm not necessarily a politician or political science. And so I think that tension and trying to bring all of those things to the table is the same. But I think I also am a little bit more comfortable with that. It's still kind of frustrating to feel like I don't fit into one clear box, especially like in the job search realm. But I think I'm still committed to that being important, and was one of the things that I appreciated about LJS, where it felt like that was okay rather than me feeling like I needed to put myself in a box because it was easier.
You've talked about some of this already. You've talked about being able to ask hard questions and it being okay to kind of jump around and be interested in lots of different things. But talk to us a little more about some of the specific things you did in college that you think prepared you for what you're doing now.
The first thing, I talk about this all the time, is I started volunteering at Youth Encouragement Services when I was a freshman in college because it was at the service fair and just happened to run into them. So I started volunteering my freshman year, stuck around, eventually was on staff, and then eventually worked with that same community through Woodbine Family Church. So I got to spend 4 years getting to know this community that I think was so crucial for me, and just getting outside of the Lipscomb bubble, building relationships with people who are different from me. It was in the Woodbine neighborhood where it's like so many different kinds of people live there. I mean, it might be changing now, but I know Nashville is changing. But that was a huge part of my college experience that was outside of Lipscomb and still connected, but fueled a lot of my interests and connecting ideas to people. And that is related to LJS too, and that my senior project, I forget what it's called, had to do with youth encouragement services and racial reconciliation and justice and creating a civil rights tour for those students. And I don't think I would have been able to do that if I hadn't started volunteering when I was a freshman, and just getting to build those relationships over all 4 years. Which is funny to think about now, like I felt very kind of disjointed with my different majors, but that was kind of the steady thing that I did have throughout college. Yeah, and I think that also was helpful too, in that Henry Nouwen talks about his L'Arche communities. I don't know if people are familiar with Henry Nouwen, but he talked about those communities as like a place to go where no one cared about his accomplishments, like he didn't need to impress anybody. And I think in college, when everyone is doing all the things and there's so much pressure to be impressive, I think that was also centering for me as a person, to be able to go somewhere and not need to be impressive, because tutoring kids after school, they don't really care what your grades are, or if you're in a social club or whatever it may be, they just want you to hang out with them. So that's one thing that I think really prepared me for where I am now and fueled a lot of my passions. And yeah, the second thing is just that tension, and learning to be okay with that tension. And it looks a little bit different now with theology and justice and how those things intersect. It looks different for me now, but I think letting myself not fit in a box then makes it easier to do now. And I'm just a little bit more comfortable with that.
If you have advice for LJS students currently coming through the program, or those freshmen that are graduating now that are about to start in the program, what would that advice be?
I think my advice would be to just seek like self-awareness and pay attention to yourself. I think a lot about that in terms of passions, like the whole idea of pay attention to what you pay attention to, and kind of let that be a guide for where you want to go in college or beyond. And I think beyond choices of classes and things like that, that is also really valuable, like spiritually and emotionally and relationally, and just like noticing who makes you feel loved when you walk away from them, and when you feel drained when you walk away from a conversation, and just letting those that like being in tune with yourself to help you realize what your passions are and where you need to go moving forward. Yeah, I think that kind of self-awareness and mindfulness practices, whether that be journaling or something else, like I think those are so valuable no matter where anyone ends up. And I think the sooner you can kind of connect with those things, that it will just only help in whatever you decide to do. And I think especially in justice spaces where I am an adamant believer that shame is not the best motivator. And I think when we can be in tune with ourselves and compassionate towards ourselves, whatever we're processing, then that only helps us become more compassionate towards other people. And I think LJS students, all kind of my experience with LJS is there's that desire to live compassionately. And I think that self-awareness only aids in that. So that would be my piece of advice.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Claire. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I congratulations on graduating.
Thank you.
I'm sorry there won't be a ceremony, but I hope you find some way to celebrate it all the same.
Thank you.